we all sang happy birthday to Tom Hanks. That was one of those moments where I thought, I'm actually in the film industry.
I'm Bishop Porter with Cast and Crew Presents, and this is Beyond the Budget. Today, I'm joined by Lisa Kim-Kuan, a financial controller with over 30 years' experience on films and shows from Saving Private Ryan to Crazy Rich Asians. She's worked across 4 continents, managing production finances in multiple currencies and countries. We'll talk about her journey from assistant accountant to financial controller and how she's navigated the global entertainment industry. Lisa Kim, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So glad to see you. I have to say, we're going global. This is our first international controller, so welcome. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So I always start off by asking accountants and controllers how they got in the business, but I know for you, you grew up in Malaysia and eventually got to London. Is that how you got started? Tell us how you got to London.
I often joke that I'm the accounting counterpart to Michelle Yeoh. Both of us are Malaysians and we work in films. It's just that we both have different roles. I came to England because my mother believed that a further education here would give me a better future. And she wasn't wrong because like all my siblings, we all went abroad to study. So my story began with I studied business in England and I excelled in accounting. But I resisted it because I didn't see myself as a numbers person. And in my mind, I was going to be a ballet dancer, which clearly didn't happen. So instead, I did a degree in philosophy, partly because I love reading. And also at that time, the late 80s, I wanted to be the only Asian with a degree in philosophy. And I think I was. But somehow the numbers followed me back, and it's just in an unexpected way and into films. This is how my story began. My career started even at the age of 16. My mother decided that I should make use of my holiday and go and help my grandparents at their bus company. And I was to audit the bus conductors taking and, reconciling their flows. I haven't got a clue about anything about counting. And sometimes the floats don't reconcile. And when you ask them, they'll say, oh, I think a ticket flew out of the bus. That's why it didn't balance. This is the beginning of my path.
Right.
And I grew up in this small town in Malaysia called Klang, far from Hollywood and movies. But my childhood memories are built on films. I went to the cinema with my parents and we went to see The Sound of Music. And my dad and I, we went to every single James Bond movie because he was a huge fan. The turning point for me was when I arrived in England and I stumbled across a premiere of Bernardo Bertolucci's Last Emperor. And there was all the stars and all the energy that was coming in, in Leicester Square. And I said out aloud, I want to be in the film industry. And perhaps there was a fairy there that evening, because the next day when I went to the job agency, there was a job for an assistant accountant for a small film company.
And how old were you then?
I think I was probably in my 30s then, early 30s.
So the fairy heard your wish and sprinkled some fairy dust and granted it.
I know. And 2 years later, I went freelance.
So you got your foot in the door, you saw the opening for the assistant accountant, you got that job, and then after 2 years there, you got an opportunity to work on, what was it, a feature?
It was the second season of a TV series of 2 English guys, in the East End of London called Paradise Club. I started in accounts payable. In the old days, the financial controllers nurtured the assistants. You work your way up. If you did accounts payable this time, the next time you're going to do cash, then you do payroll, and so on, before you get an opportunity. I think in my time, there wasn't a first. You do everything. You are the AP, cash, or, payroll. But I quickly realized I didn't want to do cash. It's not because of the numbers. It's just that I have the worst sense of direction. In those days, we had to drive to the set with cash to go and pay the crowd or reimburse the petty cash. There was one occasion when I arrived at the location and they've wrapped and all the crowd were all standing out there. They were all in the queue and I'm like trying to set up a little desk, a little table with all my change. And all the crowd were coming in with the chits. And from the chit, you have to work out, it's a gross amount. And they're all different amounts because some people might have a haircut or they might have a different scene, everything. And then you had to deduct that national insurance contribution to pay the net amount. And you got to have the change as well. So that was quite an experience. And I think that shaped me immensely because it taught me resilience and accuracy and trying to stay calm.
Calm under pressure. I can't imagine that. You had a table, you're counting out the change and having to do the math there on the spot. I hope you had a 10 key.
I did have the tin key, and then the next pressure is to go back and then count out all the chits, make sure you balance with what you took out. And that's another challenge. Yeah. So I was quick to say, I'm not going to do cash again next one, but I'm so thankful for crowd agencies.
That makes the digital piece that everyone's dealing with right now a little bit more manageable. This is what they could be doing. Pressure, counting right there in front of your people. Well, tell us, so you did that. You were assistant for a few years. How did you move up in your career after being an assistant?
I was quite happy to be a first assistant. I think, oh, you know what? Because I like people, I love managing a team and everything. I never thought of becoming a financial controller. But then on Marco Polo, the first season, the controller decided he was homesick and he wanted to leave the show. Then producers said, hey, Lisa Kim, why don't you step out? I'm like, me? Little me. And he goes, yes, I think it's time for you to step up. And thanks to him, I never looked back. Being an assistant for some time, this has enabled me to step up and be the controller that I felt comfortable with.
Right. Yeah. Well, you've done all the jobs, so you know what's required. I think that is a huge benefit to being great at a controller role because you know all the other roles, you know what your team is dealing with because you've done the work. So someone believed in you and gave you an opportunity. That's wonderful. Tell us what you look for when you're hiring your team.
It's word of mouth. So if somebody unknown, then I would check with the last accountant, and often it's just seeing how they've coped in a situation, and it all depends. Sometimes assistants work in different capacity. They might have done a big budget movie, or they may have done a smaller show. But I always welcome the newbies. They're like sponge, they're like, they believe everything you tell them. And I love teaching those. I now look back because, as you say, 30 years, sometimes I feel, oh gosh, I've been such a dinosaur because all the young assistants that I work with are now financial controllers, or better still, even like studio execs, and so when they ask me, hey, Lisa Kim, do you want a job with us? I'm like, oh, the role is reversed. You're asking me. Do you know what I mean?
The student has become the master. Is that how they do it? That means you trained them well if they're in those positions. So you should be proud.
I hope so.
Well, in 30 years, tell us some of the biggest changes you have seen. I know we're all talking about the digital workflow now that has happened in the last 5 or 6 years. When you look back over your career, are there any other big moments that stand out that were a real critical change?
In my time, we did everything manually. So when we start setting up an office, we actually start looking for an office just for the cabinets, the filing cabinets. It's just paperwork. That paperwork trail is it's actually quite like a tsunami. You know how when you're trying to do a course and then you look up and think, look at all those trays of POs and invoices and petty cash waiting to be approved. And everyone's waiting for you going, oh, yeah, it's with the accounts department. You haven't approved it yet. So it's like the whole thing. And it's actually quite overwhelming. So for me, the biggest game changer is the digital purchase order. Gone are the days now where we split the POs in different yellows and, pinks. And then the yellow copy go, I can't read this. What is it? And handwriting where you can't decipher what they're writing. So it's been great going the digital way.
The digital purchase order has changed that a lot. So when did you start using DPO?
Probably maybe 3 years ago.
Okay.
At that point, when we did it with PSL, they hadn't integrated then, but last year started, and so that was great. And that is another thing where you no longer go, oh, I'm going to match this with it, and with the coding as well. It's great because we all can make comments on it. Therefore, it can bounce back. So you don't have to approve until the comments have been addressed. So it's been great. I'm old and I wouldn't embrace technology, but this is something I love.
Okay, well, I know one of my favorite movies and one that you worked on was Crazy Rich Asians. And in that particular film, not only were you're behind the camera, you're working in the office, you're getting all these things done, but had a critical role in finding someone who was in front of the camera. Will you tell us that story?
I get asked this question a lot. I've gone to a travel show years before the film, and Henry Golding was the presenter. I didn't think anything of it and thought, oh, okay, that was a show. Then went home and picked up a book, which was by Kim-Kuan. As I was reading the book, you know how when you read the book and think, oh, what? I think that chap from the travel show would be great for the role of Nick Young. And you know what? Bishop serendipity. I got asked to do this show. And when we came to sit down to do the budget, I was told that they couldn't find the role for the actor for Nick Young. And I said, as I was reading, I pictured this chap who would be ideal for this role. Really don't know what he's doing. I didn't even know whether he's acted before. I think his name is Henry Golding. And the name got passed to John M. Chu, the director. And he managed to talk him into the role, and that was his first acting role.
That is amazing. What are the odds?
I think what's so wonderful is somebody took an accountant's say, like, you know what? I think this guy will be great. And I thought, nah, they won't take any notice of me. But yeah, John M. Chu afterwards came to me because you've got a good eye.
Maybe that'll be the next chapter in your career, casting agent, casting director.
No, I can't stop because as I'm reading now, I think I told you earlier on, going, Theo Golden, I think I know who's going to play this role, or the correspondent, I know who's going to play this role. They found that person.
Yes, yes. So you and I have bonded over our love of books, and we love to read, one of our hobbies. So Theo of Golden is the hot book right now. Who would you cast as Theo?
I like to see Tom Hanks.
Ah, and Tom Hanks, of course, from Saving Private Ryan.
Yes.
Where did you shoot? That was a couple of locations, right?
We shot Saving, most of it in Hatfield in England, and it was like a hangar, unused hangar. So we spent a good year there, and that was my first blockbuster movie. I had done like lots of independent movies, and then when I came to do Saving Private Ryan, I was beyond excited. So we shot there. We also shot in Wexford in Ireland, and that was such a great turning the point for me too, because I was given cash to do. Why? Luckily, it was okay. Cash is okay because I didn't have to drive to the location because it was all in within the hangar. But one of the greatest moment for me was when we were going home after Wexford, and the then financial controller said, "Why don't you go on the charter, and then you can pay all the cost, so it's easier. They're all in one place." And that's going back again, Then when we were paying cash as per diems, and you have a clipboard, you go around and you call out the names, and it's quite surreal when you go around, like Vin Diesel, you go, do you know what I mean? And then of course, then there was one occasion we all sang happy birthday to Tom Hanks in the catering tent, and that was one of those moments where I thought, I'm actually in the film industry. Tom Hanks is actually in this catering tent, and it is his birthday. It was one of the best moments I remember with fondness.
I'm sure. And everyone says he's such a nice guy. Okay, so now is our time for our little quiz. So this is on your projects you've worked on. So it should be somewhere in your mental Rolodex. In Crazy Rich Asians, where does the big wedding take place?
The big wedding took place in Singapore.
Yes.
And then outside in the Flower Dome. I actually was there. First time I went to set and thought, I'm going to go see this.
Oh, it was beautiful on camera. I can't imagine what it was like in person.
It was really something. It was a night shoot when everyone had, was quieter.
Okay. Marco Polo season 1 was filmed in Kazakhstan. Whose court are we following in the series?
It was with Kublai Khan as well.
Yes, Kublai Khan.
Mm.
Okay, that's what we had. Saving Private Ryan opens with a historic World War II event, which we all should know, but tell us, what was that historic event?
It was a landing, Normandy landing. It was quite a shocking opening scene. We used actual amputees on the opening, and it was really quite powerful.
I think everyone will agree with that. Last question. In Troy, which Greek hero is played by the one and only Brad Pitt?
That's testing.
It starts with an A, and it's a tendon on the back of your heel.
Healing.
Yes, Achilles. We've talked a little bit about digital workflows. We've talked about technology, your love of DPO, which we're all glad to hear. When you think about working internationally and how all these moving parts, what would you say is the biggest challenge? Is it the currencies? Is it dealing with multi currencies? Is it the cultural differences?
I think my first thought would be the time zone.
Mm,
When I was in Asia, I always loved the fact that I'm one day ahead of LA. So if I'm on Monday, you're on a Sunday. And so that had a huge advantage. But it only works if the rest of your team are also in line. Last year, I worked on a show where the producer and I likened our hours to be like the shoemaker and the elves. So when he was asleep, I'll be working on the budget, and then I'll send an email to him with the budget, and then I'll go to sleep. And then he gets up, look at the budget I've done, and then he'll make notes. And then once a week or so, we will dial in. It will mean late night for one of us, but we took turns. And I think the biggest challenge for me would be the time zone.
yeah, that makes sense. We talked about your career, your assistant accounting career, financial controller, but you were also an executive, a finance executive at Netflix. Tell us how that came to be.
So I was on Marco Polo, this season two, and it was in between season two and Crazy Rich Asian. And I was asked if I wanted to join Netflix in Singapore. And that time, it's quite a long process. And again, I think one of your earlier guests mentioned they were already in LA and there were 8 interviews in one day. When I got offered the job, I felt like I'd won the lottery. It was a grand experience, and I look back and I've learned a great deal from it, which made me a better controller when I went back to the field, because I knew what was the studio was going through, and so I knew what pressure the studio went under looking after us as in the show. And also then when as an executive in Netflix, I was an empathetic executive because I knew what my partners were going through. I think all in all, it worked to a huge advantage.
Yeah, it sounds like that's a theme. You've done all the jobs. Once you've done the job, it gives you that perspective to really understand, like you said, lead with empathy, understand what someone else is going through so you can really be a better manager, a better leader yourself. When you look at Netflix, or you've worked with all the other studios too, this is kind of a bigger question, but the industry's consolidating these days. Amazon bought MGM. Netflix, of course, is a tech provider and not a traditional studio as we thought of them in the past. We now have a Paramount Skydance Warner Brothers merger potentially happening. When you look back over your career, is there any cause for concern? How do you feel about the change that's happening in the industry right now?
I want to continue seeing great movies on this big screen. I think that was one of the things that we all thought, oh, how long will it stay in the theater before it'll go to, even though it's very convenient to watch it in your own room or whatever. But it's a whole experience about being in the cinema, isn't it? But I also want to embrace the change. I think if anything, it'll be good, and it'll be good for the freelancers out there and everything. And it's just a sign of times. Companies are getting bigger. I'm not duly concerned, but I'm also quite excited to see what's out there.
I'm hopeful. And I think too, when you look back at even the Oscars, the big winners were Sinners, which was an original screenplay, and then One Battle After Another, adapted screenplay, but original stories, not old IP or something that's a new version of the previous project. So I don't know. I think, like you said, interesting stories. We still want to go to the cinema and see something creative and experience it that way.
Yes, definitely. And some films have to be watched on the big screen.
Okay, we're going to ask you a few questions. This is a Lisa Kim pop quiz. First instinct, you just answer, okay? What is your go to crafty snack?
I love that question, but in Europe and in Asia, we are not big on the craft side. I think the first time we had the experience of that crafty experience, snack was on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. We were so surprised that, we had the snacks coming up, and you won't believe this. We had brown rice with chili sauce. That was our 11th.
That is
It was
not
so
a snack.
helpful. It was something that was different. But in Malaysia, we have a new thing now where we have a Grab order. So everyone can join into this app. And every so often we'll go, hey, we're going to start ordering something. And one of us would choose a place that we want to order from. And we go mad. I'm sure I put on like 2 kilos on that show because we ate so much. Every couple of hours we were ordering food.
Well, that's the American way. Okay, what's your favorite department to work with? Besides accounting, of course.
Oh, there's so many. I wanted to say costume.
Oh, yeah? How come?
I love to see what they bought, which designer they've gone to, how come this is so expensive, and why are we going to Hong Kong to get this dress? It's always very interesting, isn't it? And I find looking at receipts, I don't know, it's quite a lot of fun. And actually going back to the old paperwork way, we used to sign start forms, physical forms, and we used to have such a giggle because they have to enclose the passport copies, and we're like, oh, and everybody was so young. Everyone was like, what? They were born that year? Those were the great times. Yeah.
Okay, which production crews or which country are the most organized, would you say?
I've always bonded with my local team. I start by sitting down and asking them, and how have you been doing your shows? And I listen, and then I would say, let's try this way that I'm going to introduce. And often they'll reply going, but that's not how we've been doing it. And I'll say, you know what? If my system doesn't work, we'll go back to your way. To this day, I haven't had that. I love the way how sometimes I've gone to location and sold PSL to people, and they've been using Excel and everything. And I can see the horror on your face going, what? What we're going to do this? And I said, I promise you, when you see your first report, you think, I will never go back. So I can't say who's the most organized. Everyone seems to embrace a system that we've brought in. So I've been, really thankful for that.
Okay, have you ever been starstruck on set?
Now I have a story to tell you.
Oh, do tell.
I was working on Marco Polo, I think season 2, and there was a knock on my door, and I think it was a casting day, and I'm thinking, oh, it's knocking on the door is, it's Friday. Well, trying to get the cost report out in my unfriendly way. Come in, and this person opened the door, and it was Michelle Yeoh. Yeah, the stunt coordinator mentioned that I was a Malaysian, and of course, as an accounts department, we don't often go to a set. And she came into my office to say hello and wanted to meet me, and truly gracious. And she made it away going, I've been dying to meet you. I'm thinking, you stole my line. That is my line. I've been dying to meet you. And, often when you meet somebody that you're so in awe of and you try to be really cool. And I wanted her to meet the accounts department because often I feel that accounts department is like far, far away until there's a problem, and then she went around. She shook hands with every single person in the department. And I thought that was amazing.
Again, you've had some great experiences. Her, Tom Hanks, living up to the hype. I just want to ask a couple of kind of closing questions. I know you really value gratitude, empathy, loyalty. You say they're rare commodities in this day and age. Why do you think they're rare and what do you look for?
I think one can get quite complacent. We all love to complain and think, oh, I know the hours are long and everything. And I always try and wake up and with a sense of gratitude. Today, I'm going to have the best day of my life because that makes a difference when I step out the door. And also in this industry, we move from show to show. And I feel that how you treat people and how you show out really matters. Because at the end of the day, you want that person to know how I made them feel. And that's how I want to leave my legacy as such.
I love that. Well, you're going to leave a legacy for sure, Lisa Kim. I want to thank you again for coming on and sharing your story. It was so great to have you. I know we'll keep in touch.
Thank you.
And if you have a question for us or anyone on the cast and crew team, you can send it our way. We would love to hear from you. We would want to keep having conversations like this. You can subscribe to Cast and Crew Presents wherever you get your podcast.